Honourable Member Calgary Centre.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I'm going to start today by thanking my colleague from Edmonton Manning. He is a great advocate for the Canadian oil and gas industry. He does great work here, and I think he's proven on the floor of the House of Commons again today, virtually, that he represents his riding very well. The Edmonton Industrial Heartland lies just outside Edmonton. And it is, I'm certain a lot of his constituents actually work in that gem of an industrial infrastructure in Canada that provides so much industrial benefit to this country. You talk about Canadian champions. You can talk about the way the industry built up along that industry in that whole area where we produce and we add value to our resource. We're not just hewers of wood and drawers of water. We add significant value along the way there. And I joined him at the Enhanced Energy and Wolf Midstream facility in Clive, Alberta, to look at the actual end of the pipe where the CO2 is collected up in the industrial heartland and brought down for storage, 150 kilometers away in central Alberta. Magnificent world-leading technology where we actually have a highway to sequester the carbon that's produced in industrial facilities in Alberta at this point in time. So many firms are going to come to Canada because of that forward thinking that this industry has provided in Canada. And thank you again to the Minister from Edmonton Manning for everything she's brought to this debate on this. But I'll tell you, I'm as everybody knows, I've been a member of Parliament for a year and a half. And I learn a lot from my colleagues every day, including the member from Edmonton Manning. But when I got here, it was under the premise that people in this place didn't really understand the Canadian energy industry, including the Canadian oil and gas industry. And I will tell you here today, from the remarks from every member from the other parties, that is resounding in spades. Now, I remember when I first got here over a year and a half ago and going to committee meetings where certain people would say the solution to our problem in Alberta, of course, is to get a big fund to transition everybody out of oil and gas jobs. And I would sit there slack-jawed at exactly the ignorance that was actually on display from some of my colleagues from across Canada about how much this industry represents to Canada and how much it contributes to our national life every day. We are world champions in environmental production of our petroleum resource, and we actually have great reporting standards, far greater than anywhere else in the world. Now, I contrast investments in Canada, the Canadian oil and gas industry, with those in the United States and those overseas. And I can attest, the only country that comes close to Canada's environmental standards is Norway. And they've got a declining base, and they're drilling further and further and further into the North Sea in order to access more resources, because their $1.1 trillion wealth fund is entirely built upon hydrocarbon resources. So, we talk about a European business model, and I've heard a number of times in this debate about how the world is moving on. Well, take a look at where the world is moving on. The world is moving out of Canada because we're easy pickings to move away from. But in doing so, they're actually funding investments in the Middle East that has a far worse environmental standard, a far worse human rights standard, and no transparency at all on how they're producing their oil. So this is something where we actually are comparing apples to oranges. Canada is the bar. Everybody else is below that bar. So either support the bar as Canadians and look to this industry as the champion we've built over the last decades here in Canada and accept it as Canadians because it adds so much, not just from an employment perspective, 450,000 jobs, direct and indirect, but also from a taxation perspective. And let me go through those numbers, Madam Speaker, because we are talking about $130 billion in exports of our oil and gas industry per year. $130 billion, that's over 22% of our Canadian exports that are going and actually contributing to the value of life here in Canada. Imagine our Canadian dollar if we didn't have Canadian oil and gas exports. We've also got all kinds of taxation that comes here provincially, federally, and municipally in the hundreds of billions of dollars. It's an average of about $24 billion per year going back for the last 18 years. But going forward, even the go-forward numbers are still great, quite frankly, for what we get to contribute to Canadian taxes and that represents about $240 billion over the next 10 years. So another $24 billion a year going to Canadian taxpayers so they can have nice hospitals, they can have pandemic responses, they can have good schools, they can have good universities, they can have good seniors care. These are all funded by an industry that is a net contributor to Canada through and through, and has been for my whole lifetime and for most members in this house whole lifetime. We actually advanced with the free trade agreement in the United States, and the core of that free trade agreement was, of course, our energy agreement. And the trade with the United States has been fundamentally important to our lifestyle rising up in Canada. We can actually afford the things the rest of the world took for granted. And we actually have learned to take that for granted in Canada. But one thing I'm seeing quite clearly here is this division about the knowledge of what this industry brings to Canada between the producing provinces and the non-producing provinces. Because I can assure you that revenue has been shared equitably across this country, and we've added so much value.
Unfortunately, the time for private members' business, for consideration of private members' business has now expired, and the order is dropped to the bottom of the order of the precedents on the order paper. The honourable member will have 4 minutes the next time this matter is before the House to continue his speech.